Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be talking about Action Comics issue 1095 written by Mark Waid, with art and colours by Patricio Depeche and letters by Steve Wands. Clark's pal Pete Ross finds out his secret identity and it's taking a toll on the boy, keeping him up late at night ever since he found out by accident while on a camping trip with Clark. He begins to think that since Clark hasn't told him yet, Clark does not trust him. This sends Pete into a pretty interesting spiral, and one I didn't really see coming, since instead of getting really mad or angry at Clark and confronting him about it, Pete is actually just kind of confused. His friend, the kid he's known since he was a toddler, a little boy, didn't feel like he could be trusted with this secret. Waid gets right into Pete's headspace and how it's all affecting him and the people around him as well, and I love that it's not anger or hate, it's just a little bit of sadness and confusion. Pete just really doesn't know how to process this information. Pete does his best to dodge Clark while at school, waving him off at school as Clark tries to figure out what's going on with his friend, but he has to leave school quick to deal with a car crash as Superboy. While Superboy is out doing his super duties, Pete gets another chance to play hero too, as he helps save a fellow student named Curtis from being bullied about his sexuality. Waid did it in the previous issue as well, where he's setting Pete up as this guy who can deal with a tense situation by just using his charisma and just being generally likable to anyone and everyone he ever meets, and he's able to de-escalate a situation in that regard, reminding the two football players that if their coach catches them using slurs or bullying a fellow student, they will be left out of the big game on Friday night. Despite helping out and being called a good friend by Curtis, Pete can't help but feel like Clark might not actually think that, being that he can't be trusted apparently. And then for the rest of the week he's plagued with the knowledge that he knows who Superboy really is, and thus tries to avoid Clark for as long as he can, even when his friend tries to make plans with him to go and see Night of the Living Dead, which is a pretty good choice for a film. The confusion eventually does turn to anger, and he wonders to himself why doesn't he just confront Clark and talk to him about it. But while thinking about what to do next, a water main in Smallville bursts right where Pete is, and of course Superboy comes to the rescue, telling people to stay back as he freezes the gushing water and flies into the hole to deal with the problem, wanting someone to call the fire department. Loads of people jump at the chance to help Superboy, and Pete gets even more confused, since he doesn't get why Clark pretends to be a dork and a nerd and a very nervous person around everyone, since if he was just like Superboy as Clark, he would be the most popular kid in school. Again, the way Waid is tackling Pete's processing of learning Clark's secret is so different than what we usually get when an identity reveal is done, and I like that it's going through all the various emotional beats, the anger, the confusion, the sadness, it's just all there and it's all working really well. And it's great to also see it just from a regular guy's POV, we're getting this entire issue from Pete's perspective. He's just a normal guy in Smallville who gets to see Superboy every other day because Superboy just so happens to be his friend, and he's got to process that, and I just love being on that journey with him. Pete thinks about how good it would be for Clark to go public with his identity, as then Lana would know who he really is and could stop the silly love triangle she's been dealing with both sides of Clark. Pete's thoughts about Lana begin to get a bit negative too, as he thinks Lana kind of loves the gossip people are making up about her and Superboy being an item, being, madly in love with each other, they're really dating, Superboy's gonna fly to Paris for the summer, all sorts of things are spreading around town, and Lana's not really doing anything to stop any of that. So there's a moment there where Pete begins to kind of resent Lana a little bit as well. Things take a turn when Pete runs into Martha Kent, who asks how he's been going, being that he's been dodging Clark and kind of acting a bit sick lately. Pete, however, thinks about the Kents now and how they factor into all of this, thinking they could be mad scientists who work for the government and made Clark for the military in a lab, or even they don't know who he is and maybe he's hiding it from them as well. Pete's mind begins to wander even more and he begins to spiral even more, so he ends up dodging Martha again and the arriving Lana, storming off before they can talk to him properly. Ma, being Ma, of course, calls Clark, letting him know that something is wrong with Pete and he should check in on him. However, Superboy is a little bit busy around the world dealing with various disasters and rescues. Later that night, Pete hides out at a nearby overlook, but Lana ends up finding him, sick of Pete dodging her, so she sprays super glue all over the palm of his hand and grabs his hand, gluing them together tight, and she demands to know what is going on with her friend. This is where the issue really shines for me, is it's just these two characters just sitting and talking, trying to work through this problem. And I like that Lana isn't really made aware of who Pete is talking to, because he's not being very specific. So it could be talking about anyone in the town, maybe even someone Lana doesn't even know. While Pete doesn't mention who he's talking about, he wonders if Lana would view someone they knew differently had they learned their deepest, darkest secret, since this particular secret would change everything. Lana knows, however, by the way Pete's been acting, it kinda already has changed everything, thinking that it's like when they found out about Curtis and how he was gay. Lana explains that Curtis said that he had a good reason for staying closeted, which we saw earlier in the book when those two footballers were bullying him for it. But Pete also knows that it was because Curtis's parents were thinking of a divorce, and if he came out of the closet, he was so scared that would trigger the divorce from his parents. Pete knows he still kept the secret no matter what, and Lana knows that Pete trusted Curtis had a good reason not to tell anyone, and that was enough, so why can't this new secret be the same? Pete and Lana's talk is rudely interrupted by an older man and his friend, who grab both Lana and Pete, revealing that they are the older siblings of someone that Superboy recently arrested and had thrown in jail. The man knows Lana is Superboy's supposed girlfriend and wants her to give a message to the hero, but also wants to know who his real name is. Before Lana can actually say anything, Pete elbows the goon in the face, calling for help. Lana also attacks the man, but in the scuffle, she falls from the cliff, and it's luckily Superboy is there and saves Lana in the nick of time. Not letting Lana say a word, Superboy grabs the two guys and flies high into the sky, warning them that if they ever come within a mile of Pete and Lana again, or threaten anybody again, he will see and they will be very sorry. Clark seldom reacts in anger, like we just had a story about him getting in control of his emotions, trying to figure out his powers, and I like that this is kind of the evolution of that, where he's not just getting angry in people's faces just out of the blue because he's frustrated or something. He's using it as a technique to not really instill fear, but kind of keep people in line a little bit here. I like it. Superman does this every now and then. It's very seldom used, but when he gets like the dark coloring, the eyes come with the heat vision glow and everything. It's just to scare someone into doing the right thing, kind of scare someone straight. And Patricio DePelish's art is just great in this book. It does the whole shadow with the red eyes. It's that classic Superman is angered imagery, and it always looks pretty great, especially when it's used properly. And this is a case of it being used properly. Superboy returns Lana and Pete, and Lana quickly hugs him, but Superboy quickly pushes her away, wanting Lana to set the record straight around town about them supposedly dating, since something like this could happen again if people found out that they were indeed in a relationship. Superboy explains that he's got a private life, and if anything from that gets out, the people he cares for the most will be targeted, like they were tonight. Clark notices Pete, pretending to only have met him just then as he flies off, still very clearly in love with Lana. After the events of the night before, Pete is in better spirits, catching up with Clark and asking if he wants to go and see the Night of the Living Dead. Before Clark can answer though, Pete notices the look on his face, now realizing that's the same look Clark gets when his super hearing is kicking in and he can hear someone in trouble. Clark excuses himself, and Pete knows that it doesn't matter if Clark doesn't want to spill his guts to him. He's got his reasons and he's entitled to them, and he shouldn't have ever doubted his friend. Later on in science class, Pete sees that same look Clark had before when his super hearing kicked in, so he decides his role will be that of silent partner, and he's going to give Clark a little help when he can. Pete knocks over a hydrogen sulfide bottle, causing a smelly gas to engulf the science room they're in, and the class is forced to evacuate. And as they do, Clark is given the chance to escape and change into Superboy and go be of help to someone somewhere else, as Pete watches on proudly. This is a great ending to Pete's little story, and as I said before, I love it wasn't just him getting angry and him getting into a big argument with Clark, all just for drama. That would have been, the easy way to do this story. But there was some great forethought here, all thanks to Mark Waid being both in love with all of these characters and actually interested in writing them and doing something interesting with them, and even the supporting characters. Waid writes really great supporting characters, in my opinion. The books always feel like filled to the brim with characters, and they all have a role in the story at some point. We haven't got much of modern day Pete lately, but it would be great if Waid is using this to bring him back into the present day stuff, and I'd love to see what he's been up to. And hell, you could even expand the Smallville based cast as it is, because Lana and John Henry just recently moved back to Smallville to work there with Ironworks, so you could see Pete returning, maybe to give him a hand or something. We also have Reign of the Superboys beginning next issue, so that could be tied into the main story with Pete. Maybe there's some really interesting ways they could bring Pete back into the fold, and I absolutely love that. He's definitely a really cool character, and if done right, they could do some really interesting things with his adult self, like they've done in the past when he was the vice president to Lex Luthor and eventually interim president as well. There's some really cool stuff you could do with the character, and hopefully this is the start to some more Pete Ross in Action Comics. Action Comics issue 1095 was a fantastic Pete Ross-centric issue that really picked apart the trope of learning a hero's secret identity and the crushing weight of the world that comes with it. I loved getting into Pete's mind and going through all of the emotions he was going through with deciding whether to confront Clark about being Superboy, whether he tells everyone, whether he is in danger. I loved all of that sort of stuff, and I love that Waid actually went that route instead of the usual get angry at the person and have a fight trope. Waid is a master at making compelling side characters, and I really like that he made Pete Ross a compelling side character, and I can't wait to see if Pete actually comes back. This feels like Waid setting him up for a comeback in the present day side of the storylines, so I'm intrigued to see what Reign of the Superboys has in store for us next issue. I'm going to give this issue an 8 out of 10.